sport. Thus, club sport athletes who compete in intercollegiate and competitive sports through student-run organizations from their college will be eligible for employment when you affirm. Critically, Pennington OH quantifies that there are 2 million club sport athletes compared to just 430,000 under the NCAA and the NIAA. Critically, Drozdowski 23 quantifies that only 25 out of the 1,100 schools in the NCAA made a profit from their athletics department. And Sanchez 24 explains that colleges skate by on razor-thin margins, with the pandemic and decreased enrollment heightening stressors and causing 30 colleges to shut down in 2023. For reference, any future mention of student athletes refers to participants under the NCAA and the NIAA, though affirming impacts club sports athletes as well, compounding the below problems. Contention 1 is on budget cuts. To compensate, colleges are forced to redirect funds from vital programs. The first is from athletic departments. Warren 17 contextualizes that not only are women's sports not as profitable as men's, but every single D1 women's sport isn't profitable. Even amongst the men, the only profitable sport is football, with even major sports such as basketball leading to losses. Warren 18 explains that paying athletes means cutting these unprofitable sports. This problem is only compounded for D2 and D3 colleges, where Miracle 23 finds that affirming threatens the existence of all sports. Furthermore, increased taxation could lead to all athletic programs being cut across divisions. Anderson 14 specifies that by paying student athletes, athletic departments run the risk of losing their tax-exempt status and paying 15 to 35% in taxes. Even worse, colleges can no longer rely on tax-exempt donations, which are their largest sources of funding. And vital athletic infrastructure relies on tax-exempt bonds and market rate interest that earns the very survival of the university. In the long run, the student athlete suffers as well, as the shift to income either gets rid of scholarships, and unlike scholarships, income is taxed, and even if there is no replacement, getting paid invalidates the tax-exempt status of scholarship, causing students to pay upwards of $10,000 a year. The lack of or taxation of scholarships means that students have to take out more student loans up front. The second is through reducing academic opportunities. Dickler 20 explains that in the times of past financial constraints, such as the pandemic, colleges were forced to cut degrees that did not provide high return on investment, cutting majors essential to a well-rounded education, such as sociology, creative writing, chemistry, economics, environmental sciences, etc. If these programs aren't cut, then employee salaries and jobs are cut, and if overall costs aren't cut, the money must come from somewhere, leading to tuition hikes. In the few colleges that have profitable athletics departments, football subsidizes other things. In the thousands of colleges with a bleeding athletic department, tuition subsidizes them instead. As Chet 15 explains that right here in Ohio, the University of Akron recently cut 215 million jobs and $40 million from the budget, yet their tuition did not go down. Instead, they signed Terry Bowden, their head coach of the football program, to a $2 million contract. This worrisome trend is echoed in colleges nationwide, and this tuition increase just furthers the student loan debt crisis of the United States. The first impact is on reduced access to education. Butrika 23 concludes that 51% of students drop out because they cannot pay for college, affirming only worsens the problem by increasing tuition. The second impact is on racial and socioeconomic gaps in education. Diamond and Taylor 22 find that 85% of black college graduates hold student loan debt compared to 69% of white graduates, and they owe more on average. In addition, 42% of black parents take out Parent Plus loans versus 9% of white parents. Ultimately, disenfranchised borrowers are in a lose-lose situation. Either they have to take out increasing student loans, or they risk losing access to upward mobility from college education, as 85% make more wealth than their parents' post-college education. Thus, we negate.
Do you want to see any of things?
Can we skip the 250 million jobs?
University of Akron.
Oh, it was the 215 jobs. That
not 215 million.
No, I said 40 million from the budget.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's fine then. Then can we also see that losing tax-exempt status causes 15 to 30% increase in taxes?
And judges, would anyone like to see any of the evidence? Okay.
So I have 3 minutes of prep. Let's run it now.
Wait.
Hold on, that's it. Cool. I have 12 seconds used, 2:48 remaining.
Is anybody not ready? Okay. We affirm the resolution in the United States collegiate student athletes should be classified as employees of their educational institution. Our sole contention is ending exploitation. Off the backs of its unpaid athletes, the NCAA collects billions of dollars. There are 4 key sources for the collegiate athletes' deepening pockets: TV contracts, ticket sales, corporate sponsorships, and donations. Overall, Richard 21 determines that total NCAA athletic department revenue added up to $19 billion in 2019. However, PBS 23 determines that only 18% was returned back to the athletes. Regrettably, the compensation that is withheld from athletes represents outright exploitation. Because the NCAA is the only buyer in the labor of college athletes, Columbia University 23 explains that the NCAA forms a labor cartel, which allows them to artificially fix the price of labor. Universally, political theorists and economics condemn this extreme imbalance of market power. Colin 16 of the University of Wisconsin clarifies the labor theory of value. The difference between a worker's wage and the value of their service production accumulates to moral exploitation. In this case, when the NCAA profits billions because of the complete lack of compensation for athletes, exploitation is obvious. Subpoint A is racial equity. The University of Chicago states that payment caps set by the NCAA are holding down benefits that would go to top-performing athletes, many of them African Americans from low-income families. Empirically, Black athletes disproportionately contribute to college revenue. Hawkins 10 explains that Black basketball players played, started, and scored more than 2.5 times more than white athletes, so their contributions to college basketball income far exceeded their representation. However, although Black men are the majority in Power 5 basketball and football teams, where college sports are most commercialized and lucrative, Columbia University 23 writes that amateurism policies deprive these players of approximately $1.4 billion per year. Unfortunately, even the recent expansion of name, image, and likeness rights is insufficient. Because Witchery 21 articulates that these endorsements can be as little as $3, Lamb explains that college sports often end up as rich white people using Black people for profit. Ultimately, the denial of compensation to Black athletes who derive revenue is the single most damaging dimension of college sports. Subpoint B is on injuries. Because of the rigor and competitiveness of the NCAA, injuries are extremely prevalent. Problematically, Kretschmar 22 finds that the NCAA does not mandate colleges to pay the healthcare costs for athletes. In fact, the parents' insurance is considered the primary insurance for paying the athletes' injury costs. Leroy 23 notes that when Fred Rensing, an Indiana State University football player, was paralyzed, the Indiana Supreme Court ruled that Rensing was not an employee and therefore was ineligible for compensation. This case is widely cited as legal precedent to deny college players compensation for their injuries. Even worse, Dean 22 writes that the NCAA Catastrophic Injury Insurance Program does not come into effect unless the cost of treatment exceeds $90,000. The impact is twofold. First is on lives. Rainier 11 states that longer delays in seeking hospital care and lack of medical affordability hinder treatment. Linder 23 explains that approximately 1.3 million injuries occur yearly among college athletes in the United States alone. Second is on poverty. Grad 22 states that about 60% of college athletes have debt. According to a study by Drexel University, 86% of collegiate athletes live below the federal poverty line. Tragically, colleges and the NCAA choke off further income. For example, Giovanni quantifies that less than 0.2% of the University of Texas' sport revenue went back to compensate their players. Furthermore, the NCAA strictly limits student athletes from getting jobs. At best, Robinson 19 notes that student athletes are capped at $2,500 a semester. Critically, RAB 20 clarifies that nearly 14% of Division I student athletes experienced homelessness in the previous year and 24% were food insecure in the past 30 days. Worse yet, rates of homelessness and food insecurity were higher among student athletes at Division II schools and two-year colleges. To end the exploitation of student athletes, we urge you to affirm. Okay.
You ready for
Yes. Okay.
Are all of the judges ready to begin cross?
Then since I spoke,
sorry, give me one.
Oh, you're all good. Sorry. Okay. You're ready? Yeah. Okay. And then since I spoke first, could I have the first question? And I'll start that time now. So under this resolution, do we only pay minority athletes and that too of sports that generate revenue?
We're paying all collegiate athletes.
Okay, so what about like the majority of these student athletes are not African American or even minorities, right? So aren't you just co-opting their labor? Even though predominantly African American students are the ones generating money, why should, for example, golf or like any of these women's sports, like actually, for your own definition, get
our analysis is really clear. Because sure, you can argue that there's other races and genders involved, but African Americans are uniquely the single most contributor to college revenue, college sports revenue, and that's why they're uniquely
I understand, but that's exactly our point. If they're the ones contributing, why should everyone else profit off of their labor? Because you agree, we give money to every single student athlete in the United States, that to like
but when you pay these employees, you're going to see this labor theory of value that we explain in our case significantly decrease. Can I take a question though?
Sure.
Okay, so on your like second contention about opportunities, you mentioned how tuition increases, right?
Yeah.
So how much will it increase by if we like pay these student athletes?
We argue that even under like the smallest definition of what a student athlete is, which is going to be like just like 500,000, they would have to pay $12.5 billion because they have to give all of these employees minimum wage, and that's like disregarding any of the benefits. Wait, real quick. And then if it's like the 2.5 million including club sports, that's $62.5 billion. That's how much either needs to be cut or tuitions need to increase to like have that money.
So how much does every single student, like how much will every single student have to pay more?
Right, so like, I'm sure you could tell me, but I would argue $62.5 billion is a lot of money. Like, how would colleges afford it?
No, I'm asking, like, how much would each individual, like, pay an extra if these colleges paid their employees?
Can you tell me it's not a lot? Like, how much would it be? Like, if it's...
Well, I don't know, I'm asking you.
Yeah, so we argue that all of these students have to make up $62.5 billion. It's a lot of money. We can find later the amount of, like, students in the United States. So we would argue any increase in tuition just hurts minority students more. And as we both, like, talk about, like, racial inequality, we don't want to increase tuition for those who already can't afford it.
Yeah, you can take a question.
So when you're talking about these billions of revenue, that's the NCAA, right? Not these educational institutions?
The athletic department funds these the athletic departments in the institutions.
Yeah, that I understand. But you say the NCAA specifically makes billions of dollars, not the colleges, right?
That's because the revenue that generates from these colleges that they get off these athletes go to the NCAA.
So they're the ones giving money. You said they make like off of brand deals,
athletes,
right? Like the colleges themselves are not negotiating brand deals. They don't get any share of that money. If only 25 out of 1,100 athletic departments aren't profitable, where are they going to get this money? Because the resolution is their employees of their educational
We're actually going to argue, like we're going to talk more about that in our rebuttal, that these colleges actually do have enough money.
Okay.
I'll take a vote.
Just as a brief off-time roadmap for all the judges, I'm just going to be going straight down my opponent's case. Is everybody ready? Great. I'll begin time on my first. Let's start at the top of their case where they talk about ending exploitation. First, they talk about how compensation is lacking right now and that the NCAA is can be qualified as a labor cartel. But first, what they do not understand is that the athletes are employees of their educational institution, not the NCAA. Ignore any claims about the NCAA making money because the colleges themselves do not make any money, as Drozdowski 23 explains that only 25 out of 1,100 athletic departments are profitable. They just don't have the money to make student athletes employees. Sanchez 24 quantifies that colleges are always on the verge of bankruptcy, especially post-pandemic. That's really critical. You need to flow that through. But then, look at Anderson 14 from our case that they literally called for, that specifically says that by paying student athletes, athletic departments run the risk of losing their tax-exempt status and paying 15 to 35% in taxes. Even worse, colleges can no longer rely on tax-exempt donations, which are the largest sources of funding. Vital athletic infrastructure relies on tax-exempt bonds, and market rate interest threatens the very survival of the university. That is why, in the affirmative world, they actually would have to pay tens of thousands of dollars, meaning that they actually lose money with employment. That's really critical. At the end of the day, we're not helping anybody. We're not helping income inequality. But then, what we would tell you on their whole entire exploitation and poverty argument from Crenshaw 22 is that rising costs turns their exploitation and poverty argument on its head, as higher costs make college unaffordable for those with more limited means. That right there turns their whole entire case. They have no access to their impacts. But then, on to their subpoint A on racial equity. First, a turn from the NCAA 23 telling you that 62% of college athletes are white and only 16% are black. When they talk about majority black athletes, they only talk about football and basketball, but what is critical is that affirming pays all sports and already privileged athletes who don't even make revenue for the colleges, as the only profit generating sport is football. That's really critical. They're not looking at the bigger picture. Do not let them win right there, because at the end of the day, paying all student athletes worsens racial equality because black labor is co-opted by privileged athletes. We fit best under a structural violence framework because we solve best for all minority students. Further, look at Huron et al. 2012 that tells you that education is the only way to escape poverty, and only the neg world maintains by preventing tuition increases and academic cuts. At the end of the day, our whole entire case serves as a prerequisite in order to solve for any of the problems that they hypothetically tell you. But then, if you don't believe that, we tell you that uniquely we solve better, because once you introduce employment, colleges can circumvent Title IX by claiming it's not discrimination on the basis of gender, but rather just because of performance and money brought in. Title IX uniquely talks about colleges as a whole, but if, for example, a male professor brings in more money, has better classifications, teaches more classes, etc., paying him more is performance-based, not gender discrimination. At the end of the day, you need to look to where we're solving for both racial equity and also gender equity, and that is only going to be achieved best in the neg world. But then, let's go on to their subpoint B on injuries. At the top, even if student athletes specifically don't get healthcare insurance from their educational institution, many colleges offer health insurance to all of their students. Abdillah 23 explains that only 8% of college students lack health insurance. It's not a widespread problem. Judges right there vote off of magnitude, because we would tell you that even if you don't buy that there's just no money to fund this, collective bargaining doesn't matter at the end of the day if the college simply cannot afford it. The root cause of the problem is the funds that the colleges simply do not have. But then, if you don't believe that, we would tell you that even if you buy all of their arguments, there are other sources of hardship assistance in terms of Pell Grants. Most fans of college sports do not actually realize that the NCAA allows for additional help to athletes through the Student Athlete Opportunity Fund, which is intended to provide direct benefits to student athletes or their families as determined by conference officers. Some of the benefits include non-athletics related health expenses that are not covered by an athlete's insurance plan, travel expenses, and a $200 annual clothing allowance as long as these Pell Grants are available. That's really critical. We're solving for this right now in the neg world. They have no reason to actually flow through their argument. Right there we tell you we solve for all their impacts, and our case is a clear prerequisite. Vote neg today.
All right. We have 248 in prep, and we're going to run down from there. Stop it there. 34 seconds used. My math says 2:14 remaining. Cool. I'm gonna go my water. All right. Really simple. Responding to their rebuttal, going down their case. Are any of my judges or opponents not ready? Cool. The biggest problem with the rebuttal just given is that half of the responses are a cross-application of their own case, which makes it really convenient for us to respond to. For example, they tell you that we lose tax-exempt status, that we increase tuition costs, and that education decreases when you affirm. I'm going to address all of that on their case. You don't have to flow that on our side. But specifically, they tell you that athletes are employees of the institution, not the NCAA. We completely agree. However, any money that comes from NCAA sporting events go back to the university. Think about an Ohio State football game, for example. It's NCAA money, but Ohio State receives the revenue that comes from it. At that point, we're finding through the labor theory of value that the NCAA and college institutions are able to profit off of black athletes specifically, but these black athletes aren't being properly compensated, which is a moral harm. Let's go on our first argument about racial equity specifically. First, they tell you that only 16% of athletes are black. Sure, but they are disproportionately scoring more points and playing more minutes, which is why they're funding more of the profit that the NCAA is making. Second, they tell you to weigh structurally. We agree. We say weigh structurally and help the worst people. That's why we give black athletes money. Third, they tell you that Title IX creates gender equity. I don't know what that has to do with racism. let's go on our second contention about healthcare insurance. They only give you 2 more responses. The first is that only 8% of college student athletes don't get health insurance. We completely agree. The problem is that the current health insurance plan has a $90,000 deductible, which is really unfortunate. For example, if your medical bill is $60,000, you're paying all $60,000. But second, they tell you that Pell Grants solve for non-athletic costs. Maybe so, but then why do we see that 24% of D1 athletes are food insecure? Their argument makes no sense at the impact level. Let's go down their case. Start with this ridiculous definition that student athletes incorporates all club sports. That doesn't make sense according to North Central College 21 because the NCAA says explicitly that collegiate athletes are defined as D1, D2, and D3 only. But moreover, they have to typically practice around 20 hours per week according to the NCAA, while club sports teams only practice 2 to 3 times a week. But second, think about it logically. If I am a Ohio State, like just a regular student, and I'm playing soccer on the campus lawn, by their definition, I'm a student athlete. That makes no sense. But 2 more responses at the top. First, you should evaluate the welfare of student athletes first and foremost as a judge. That's because they're the ones most forgotten in college sports when coaches are paid, college gets endorsement deals, and TV ads. But second, because student athletes get the short end of the stick. But also second, they don't have any sort of quantifiable impact for you to vote off of, which is bad because there's no sense of scale in the round and no source of comparative weighing. That means by default, you're looking at our impacts. On their first argument about athletic departments, Richter 21 says the NCAA total revenue is $19 billion. They say the cost is $12.5 billion. We have extra money. But then specifically, Strachan says that any sort of evidence that they talk about, for example, the 25 colleges that are profitable, is still flawed because colleges are nonprofit, so they have to increase expenses to keep their status. Moreover, the 15 to 30% increase in taxes is only on taxable income. Sure, I might pay $10,000 in taxable income, but that means I'm making $100,000 in total income. On their second point on academics, turn it all, because Harvard finds in 2013 that college athletics increases applications to a school by nearly 20%, which increases the educational atmosphere for all students because of the quality of applicants. At the impact level, even if tuition increases, that isn't problematic and links in directly into their arguments because AIRS 09 finds that tuition rises for the poorest families are met dollar for dollar by financial aid. At that point, you know on the first impact that there's no decrease in educational access, and on the second impact that there's no change in the social gap because fundamentally only the wealthy families are paying. For these reasons, we urge you to affirm.
Real quick, can you see the card that like all the NCAA revenue goes to colleges?
Yeah. Do you want to see the $19 billion also?
Just that it goes to
Okay, yeah.
colleges, that's all I need.
My Wi-Fi isn't working, so it might take a second. I'm on the dinosaur game right now. Okay, there we go. Here we go. Here it says that it's the athletic departments, not the NCAA. And then the 19 billion is actually right there too. Yeah.
And then we'll start that running. Okay, where that like the NCAA revenue goes back to the
It
colleges?
says athletic departments.
Yeah, but like this is the NCAA's money. Just like where does it go back to the colleges?
If you guys want to argue that athletic departments are just the organization behind each college, you guys can do it.
Can I move this first?
Yeah.
I believe I have the first question.
Go for it.
Awesome. All right. I'll begin time. No. Okay, so let's go on to this argument that you brought up in your rebuttal, right? Where like a good athletic team increases applications, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so if I apply to a university, does that mean I'm subject to attending that university?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so that's exactly the point. I can apply to like 25 universities if I want, but realistically, where my financial needs are met is where I'm going to attend,
So
correct?
if you guys want to provide evidence that more applications are sent per student, that might respond to our Harvard evidence. But in general, the Harvard evidence is pretty explicit that the overall educational atmosphere increases because of the number of applications to begin with, because that makes the schools more competitive, and as a result has better
Do you
education
have a
for
card
all
to
students.
prove that not only are the applications increasing, but the amount of attendance is increasing?
The amount of attendance is the same at most colleges. They don't change that much.
Okay, so then why does the amount of applications increasing matter?
Because it creates a more competitive educational atmosphere, and as a result, Harvard finds that the overall educational atmosphere improves for all students.
I mean, I'd argue that it doesn't really matter. Like when I go to a college, I'm not thinking about how
Okay,
many
you can
people
argue
apply
that, but
to
Harvard
Harvard,
literally,
you can have a question.
like, if you want to argue against Harvard, go for it. I don't think that's how you're winning the round. Can I get a question?
Okay, go ahead.
So let's talk about evaluating like the 8% of student athletes that don't have health insurance, right?
Great.
So like we agree with that, but isn't there a fundamental problem with that health insurance and the fact that it's a $90,000 deductible?
So what we would argue is that the best way to encompass health insurance in the long run itself is by promoting future success for these students. What's really critical is that in your world, you're actually going to see these academic cuts be created so that in the future, these people aren't even going to be able to afford like things such as
So,
health insurance.
if we-
So in
yeah.
any world, a deductible is going to exist. But what you need to see is a world in which you're going to be able to afford that such deductible. In a world where like these athletes are actually receiving this education without having any academic
respond?
cuts, we would tell you that this deductible would not be a problem.
So I agree, universally, health insurance plans have deductibles. The problem is that the current deductible in place is $90,000. And you say, when we don't affirm, magically this deductible is going to be really affordable for college students, but I don't see a reason why.
I mean, when someone has more education, then the jobs and the careers that they're able
But
to have
they're
access
getting
to
injured
are
in
going to be
college. That's the problem. They're getting hurt by playing the sport.
First of all, if they're playing a sport, they're also put into a place where they have to actually receive the education that the college mandates.
What does that have to do with health insurance, though?
Okay, when you get an education, right, you're getting an education in order to have a future job or career. When you have that job or career, you are making an income.
Okay.
When you make an income, then you are better suited to be able to
So-
pay this high deductible that you're talking about.
Let me summarize your argument for you, and then correct me if I'm misinterpreting it.
Sure.
You're saying right now, like we have a lot of injuries going on, and the current deductible is $90,000. But because now these student athletes have education, which they'd have either way because they're student athletes, now they're gonna have a cheaper
So
deductible in the
you
future,
are
even though that
actually
doesn't do anything with the current injuries
You are
that are in
actually
place because
misunderstanding
they're like
because
playing
what
basketball.
we would tell you is that sure, they can receive an education in both worlds, but insofar as in your world there's going to be academic cuts, the majors and programs that they're going to have access to are going to be much less than in a world where you're going to see that this is not going to be an
Sure.
affirmative, but that's time.
We're gonna run prep, so I'll just start that now. That's 30 seconds used total. Does that seem right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is anyone not ready for me to begin?
Okay.
Then as a brief off-time roadmap, I will go down my opponent's case and then my own, and I'll start my time on my first. Let's start at the top of my opponent's case, and they talk about exploitation, that the NCAA is making a lot of money, but what is really critical is they missed the warranting in our case. The only institutions actually making this money are like these Big Ten colleges, and at max, 25 out of the 1,100 NCAA institutions. Under the resolution, it's not just profitable colleges that are paying, it is every single educational institution in the United States that has sports. Not all of them can afford it. It simply doesn't work. They argue that athletic departments are the individual schools. Why would one school subsidize another? That actually further links into the point that each individual college can't afford it. That's our Przewski 23 and our Sanchez 24 card that has gone unresponded to. But furthermore, we tell you that the athletics departments themselves are going to be taxed for. If they're going to lose 35% of the revenue they're bringing into taxes, clearly they can't afford it. So independently of just paying like salaries and benefits, they're also going to lose money because they lose donations. They don't interact with this point that they lose donations because they're not tax exempt anymore. If colleges don't have donations, they simply can't fund any of their programs. It only worsens the problem. And again, we gave that chart that increased tuition is going to increase decrease minority attendance. We'll answer that more on their side of the flow. But they have this whole like racial, like structural violence overview. We say that we fit better into that because okay, there are more minority minority students than are minority student athletes. So you're going to want to prioritize the best quality and affordability of education for all of these minority students. Furthermore, like white and privileged students are just going to co-opt the labor of like black students. Again, they mentioned themselves that football is the only sport that's really making profit and is predominantly black. So why should all of these other sports make money off of them? Why should they receive at base $25,000, if not more? But furthermore, that's going to be prerequisite. The only way to actually solve in poverty is to solve for all students, not just student athletes. But on to their second contention about health insurance, if you buy that health insurance is bad right now, that's fine. There's no incentive for it to increase. Maybe just more people get it, but they say the actual quality of the health insurance is bad. That doesn't change, and only 8% of people even lack health insurance at all. It doesn't matter. But even if you buy that like quality will increase, there is no money, there is no funding. Even if like idealistically we want to make it better, there is no money to do it, because when you go to our side of the flow, we explain that colleges are always on the verge of bankruptcy. But furthermore, they tell you that like students playing on the lawn will be like allowed under the resolution. But specifically,
Does that check out with the official time? Perfect.
Just an off-time roadmap. We'll be starting on our case and then going on to our opponent's case. The easiest place to vote in today's round is solely on athletic exploitation. Over $19 billion in revenues collected each year, but very few of that is actually returned back to the athletes. The gap between the worker's wage and the value of their service production is apparent and morally incorrect, and that's why these student athletes are being exploited. My opponents give you a few responses, but they all either come from their case or they're all inherently flawed. Again, they start with this overview about like a prereq on their case. We'll get to more on that on their case, but then specifically they say that you're taxed 35% more and you'll lose donation, but that's only on income. And they don't actually tell you how much donations will decrease by, and they don't even have an actual warrant. We're just going to say that colleges have enough money. But then specifically on the first contention, they read two responses that white players are helped better and it's bad to solve for all black students. But black athletes are disproportionately playing more minutes and scoring more points. And the labor theory of value that they never contested tells you that the difference between a worker's wage and the value of their service production accumulates to moral exploitation. At that point where they don't contest this, you're voting for us. That's because black people have the greatest discrepancy under this value, as per our Columbia University evidence that tells you that current payment ceilings deprive these black athletes of approximately $1.4 billion per year. Therefore, paying athletes uniquely benefits these African Americans, and by their own framework of structural weighing, we're doing the most good. But second, on health insurance, on the 8%, we're saying that deductible is uniquely harming because it's $90,000. And then they say the quality is always bad, but we're arguing about how these students can't afford the $90,000 deductible in the health insurance program that's right now. On that's why we need to pay these student athletes, because when they're classified as employees, they'll be able to have health insurance, which benefits the 1.3 million athletes who are injured each year. But now let's move on to their case. They give this definition again, but remember that the NCAA explicitly says that it's defined as D1, D2, and D3, and you have to practice at least 20 hours a week. And if their definition does apply, then you can classify that to pretty much anybody on a college campus playing sports. And then they say it's intercollegiately, but prefer the NCAA definition. On budget cuts specifically, they drop pretty much all of our responses and don't interact with a single thing. The first, we tell you that there's $19 billion in revenue. Even if donations are totally gone, that's only $2.8 billion less. And Stratch and 15 finds the colleges are not non-profit. That means that takes out everything on their subpoint A. But specifically on academics, they also don't respond to the term that we tell you that from Harvard Business School that explains that increasing collegiate athletes nearly increases the educational atmosphere by 20%. Even if tuition increases isn't problematic for educational access, their first impact, Ayers 9, as tuition rise, poorest families saw financial aid packages rise dollar for dollar. For poor students, then the important issue isn't tuition so much as financial aid. At the end of the day, even if you don't believe anything that we say, our opponents don't provide you with a quantifiable impact. Instead, we give you $1.4 billion lost and 1.3 million injuries. Thus, we urge you to sign your ballot pro.
Thank you for pros.
Since we spoke first, we have the first question.
Go for it.
Okay, then I'll start that time now. So you mentioned that like all of these individual colleges can afford it because there's $19 billion of revenue, right? But like how much of that is made up by like just the Big Ten or like the top 25 and only profitable, we say athletics departments, not colleges, we say like
Right.
only 25 are profitable. So
So-
how much is like on the individual level?
Right, so the problem is when you analyze at the individual level, it looks like a lot of colleges are not profitable. But the critical response is the stricken evidence that doesn't go contested, which finds that because colleges are a nonprofit institution, they have the accounting procedures and schemes to make sure that they are creating as much expenses as possible to make sure that they keep their nonprofit status. So regardless, all colleges that don't seem profitable still have enough money. Can we take a question?
Real quick, just a clarification. We're not saying the colleges themselves aren't profitable. We're saying specifically that their athletic departments lose more money
Right,
than they bring in.
the athletic
That's
department is
addressed as you
also
put it through.
nonprofit too.
Right, yeah. So like it's a nonprofit is overall. So like if the athletic department makes money,
So if
that
they-
is redirected to other places. But we're telling you that the athletic department uniquely, just by itself,
So-
doesn't make any money. Almost all of them lose
The
money.
only way you win that argument is by saying that athletic departments are like a C Corp or an S Corp or some sort of profitable
It's just
institution.
that, like,
because
they
we're
make
talking
less
about
money than they
nonprofit
bring
accounting in general.
Yeah,
Right,
they make
but-
less money than they
So
bring in.
if
So-
we say that athletic departments are also nonprofit, then right there, the nonprofit in general, it falls under that criteria.
Exactly, that's what we're saying. The problem is your analysis looks like most nonprofits are not profitable. Sure, but that's because the stricken evidence is very explicit that the accounting schemes that nonprofit institutions take make sure that they maximize their expenses
We'll address
so
that
that they
in speech.
don't
I think
look
there's a misunderstanding,
profitable.
but you can
guys,
ask a question.
you guys definitely shouldn't
say-
address that in
we
speech
say
because it's first
athletic-
final and it hasn't been responded to.
We said again and again is when the athletic departments, we're not talking about the colleges as a whole.
We're saying that athletic departments are a nonprofit institution. Can we take a question?
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about this health insurance deductible. Let's say we don't affirm. Is there any change in the $90,000 deductible that student athletes have to pay, which is 1.3 million injuries, as long as they get injured?
You uniquely said that you agreed in second cross that the deductible simply is not going to go away. So what we need to do is put the burden on how to prove that this deductible can be best accounted for. In a world where we tell you that we're promoting future success by avoiding academic cuts, you're going to see that these athletes are going to be better suited in their future to account for these deductibles. That's really critical because in your world, they're going to have no way to actually pay for these deductibles. But in our world, you're going to see that because their future is going to be better accounted for through the academic majors and programs not being cut, it's going to be a much better honest
So
bet.
the very simple response is that even though all health insurance plans have deductibles, it doesn't have to be $90,000.
Right, so the
Specifically,
quality
hold on, let me respond, please. When you guys have employment benefits because you were employed, you are able to leverage a lower deductible because you have a better health insurance plan. That's the key warrant that you guys miss.
Can you respond to that real quick?
One sentence. Brief.
Okay. We're saying the quality doesn't change when you affirm. If they're bad now, they will continue to stay bad.
It's going to be their case, our case, and is anyone not ready?
Okay.
Awesome. I'll begin telling my first word. Let's start at the top with what we tell you time and time again that they simply have no response to, is the fact that the athletes are employees of their educational institution, not the NCAA themselves. So ignore any claims that they have made throughout this round about the NCAA making money because the colleges themselves don't make any money. As Drozdowski 23 tells you time and time again that only 25 out of 1,100 athletic departments are profitable. They just don't have the money to make student athletes employees. That's really critical because our Sanchez 24 evidence also went clean conceded, where we tell you that colleges always are on the verge of bankruptcy, especially post-pandemic. That's really critical. We tell you there's simply not enough funds. But then let's go on to their contention one, where they completely drop our Anderson 14 evidence from case, where we tell you that by paying student athletes, athletic departments run the risk of losing their tax exempt status and paying 15 to 35% in taxes. That's really critical because that's the largest sources of funding. If they're not receiving funding, they're not going to have the funds. But then from Crenshaw 22, that one clean drop, we tell you that rising costs turns their whole entire argument on the poverty, because as higher costs make college more unaffordable for those of limited means, they're not actually solving for equality at the end of the day. But then the turn from the NCAA 23 that went unresponded to tells you that paying all student athletes worsens racial equality because black labor is co-opted by privileged athletes. At the end of the day, they're solving for these 62% of college athletes that are white and only 16% that are black. They're not solving for a large enough problem. Weigh this on magnitude, they lose right there. But then let's go under their subpoint beyond injuries. At the end of the day, we tell you that only 8% of college students lack health insurance, but not only that, At the end of the day, we solve better in terms of the fact that they continuously bring up this high deductible. We tell you that by promoting future success and by making sure that we don't reduce access to education, the best way to do that is to avoid academic cuts. The only way you're going to see that happen is in the neg world. You're voting right there. But then onto our side of the flow, you're preferring our definition, because we tell you that we prefer the 2.5 million student athletes, that the colleges simply do not have the funds to make employees. At the end of the day, that's why in our world you're going to see an increased access to education, and not only that, we close the racial socioeconomic barriers that are only going to exist in the affirmative world. It's a clear neg ballot today.
We have 107 in prep. We're going to use the remainder. Stop it there. The overview is kind of across the flow, but it's essentially our case, their case. I'll signpost clearly. Is anyone not ready? The one word that defines your ballot today is Ayers. Ayers 09 very clearly explains that when poor families face an increase in tuition, there is a dollar for dollar increase in financial aid. That goes completely unresponded to in all of their speeches, and it goes cleanly extended in every single one of ours. At that point, they don't get access to either of their two impacts, because there's no decrease in educational access if poor families are paying the same amount in tuition, but there's also no increase in social economic gaps, because fundamentally only wealthy families are paying more. Maybe this social economic gap is actually decreasing because now wealthy families are paying more. But then, they drop the argument that North Central defines that college athletes are only like the ones that are in D1, D2, and D3. That's the only thing you should evaluate, which means if you believe in any of the next three arguments, you have to vote pro because they don't have any access to their argument. First is that there is a fundamental exploitation when the NCAA is able to profit off of the labor that is not going paid. Specifically, black athletes are being hurt because they are losing out on $1.4 billion of income every single year per Columbia University. They say that there's an increase in taxes. Okay, sure, that happens on income only. Then they say that colleges don't make enough money. Sure. If colleges don't make enough money, they would have had a great response to the striking evidence that says that colleges are only a nonprofit institution, and as a result, they have accounting schemes to make sure that they don't look profitable. That is cleanly conceded, and funding is the second reason why. As long as you believe that colleges have enough money to pay their student athletes, because there's $19 billion in a total revenue that's brought in, but they say that paying student athletes costs $12.5 billion, as long as you believe that there is a surplus there, you know there is enough funding, which means there's another reason why you can't vote on their case. But third, on healthcare insurance, they say only 8% have healthcare insurance, but that's the problem because the deductible is $90,000. That's way too expensive, so we urge you to affirm. Thank you.